everyone. Thanks for watching. With me today, we have the connoisseur of the occult, Andy Mercer. Andy, how are you?
I am pretty good. Thank you very much. Yeah, not bad.
And also with me is the master of high strangeness, Steve Ward. Steve, how's it going?
Very good. It's great to be the master at something.
And I'm Susie, in case anyone didn't know. So today we're here to talk about Passport to Magonia by Jacques Vallee, Vallee, if you're some Americans.
If you're a Philistine, right? Okay.
So by all accounts, a book that is about UFO pilots potentially being the Fae would be right up my alley. However, I did not like the book.
I did.
Why?
Listen, I have to go work on my transmission right now.
I think at least part of it's generational, to be honest. And while I know, it's a different time, different mentality, I don't care really. Because, I was raised by someone that was really progressive and was, from the same generation, if not a little bit older than him. And also, I think it's kind of, and I know, again, I can hear the booing, but it's kind of like Star Wars for me. I didn't see it as a kid. When I finally watched it, which was only a few years ago, I'm like, this has crappy graphics and the plot's full of holes. Because I didn't see it when it was new, when the graphics were advanced for the time, or special effects, I should say. And I don't have any childhood fondness for it. But I'm hoping maybe the two of you can kind of reel me back.
Well, all I can say is, Susie, if I don't fix that transmission, I'm not going anywhere.
Can you be more specific about what it was particularly that grated your cheese?
So the stories in it were good. There's a couple of my favorite stories ever in it. I feel like he made a lot of assumptions that he expects people to just accept because he's an expert. It was a little bit ego forward, but I've been trying to justify it in my brain and soften it for myself. But I think probably at the time he was. And I don't disagree with his assumptions usually. I just feel like it's not the best presenting research to not present the reasonings behind your assumptions. Knowing a little bit more about some of these stories, I understood where he was coming from, but he doesn't explain that in there. And another thing I didn't like is he was very Eurocentric.
He's French, so.
Yeah.
Listen, Andy, you got to watch those Eurocentric types, right?
Yeah.
Oh, man,
They're terrible.
I'm on the lookout every day for those guys.
They're trouble. He did, I think, briefly mention a Native American story, but there are so many other stories throughout the world. There's a ton from Africa, a ton from the Philippines that he could have used, and it makes it more compelling, more interesting when you show it's all around the world throughout time.
Yeah.
And then the last thing that I don't really say it is the reason I didn't like it, but he cites his sources, which is great. But then I looked into some of the sources, and it's not that I think he was lying. It's just that I can't back it up because some of the sources no longer exist. Like one of them was a magazine from I believe it was I want to say 65, and I'm not sure if that's right, which I just can't find. But like I'm thinking, like, is this a magazine like the 14 Times, or what kind of magazine was this? Like he just it was a bit weird to see a magazine listed, I suppose. But I did like that he had his sources in there.
There is always the risk, of course, if you can list lots of sources, but no one's able to find them. But it's not much use to you, unfortunately. Do you think it was more that perhaps there was a lot of assumed pre-knowledge of the topic before reading it? It wasn't not a beginner's book, should we say?
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I think you could pick it up not knowing anything and enjoy it if you don't think about it too hard.
Right.
I thought about it very hard, Susie, and I enjoyed it. Just so you know. Now, I have some rebuttals here. He started out as a very nuts and bolts guy. His first 2 books, A Challenge to Science and An Enemy Phenomenon, he was looking at it as E.T. and trying to look at it very, very logically. And then he admits when he writes Magonia, he says, "Look, this is not a scientific book." But it's like one of these guys that keeps hitting the brick wall when they try to put these things in the physical. So and also his focus was more in the Celtic realm. He wasn't he wasn't I don't think interested in going. He could have gone everywhere, all over the world, but it was more Eurocentric, I think, on purpose. I think that and also his that this was one as everybody here knows. The name John Keel ring a bell? Okay, well the 2 books that just completely changed my thinking was first Operation Trojan Horse by Keel, and then shortly followed up by Magonia, A Passport to Magonia. And it just changed everything for me, and so I don't agree with your criticisms. I think that he started out with maybe the more Eurocentric view, which is great because if you look at Celtic folklore and so forth, and some modern day UFO experiences, the patterns are phenomenal. I mean, with missing time and the way that some of these entities looked and so forth. So I disagree with your initial. I'm not going to say diatribe because it was not a diatribe. It was a very well reasoned. It was a very well reasoned diatribe. Let's put it that way.
And my criticism is kind of a catch-22. Because I liked that there were varied stories, like there was a lot of stories, but at the same time, I feel like he could have gone into more depth on some of them and, analyze them a little bit further, but then it would have been like a 10-volume set, right?
Speaking of a 10-volume set, if you go to the trilogy he wrote about 20 years later, Dimensions, Revelations, and Confrontations. He revisits some of the Magonia stuff because at that time Magonia had been out of print for maybe a couple decades. I don't know, but he does expand more. I think you might appreciate more of his writings and his viewpoints if you go through those books, and especially if you get into Messengers of Deception, that sort of thing. I mean, to me, Vallee is brilliant. He's almost as brilliant as John Keel. Okay, I mean just a hair different. But I was blown away by Magonia. So there you go.
I will say it is like a great source to kind of use as a jumping off point to find interesting stories and look deeper into them.
And that's what he did in that trilogy.
I also wonder if it was probably one of the first books that looked at the whole world of these phenomena from that perspective. It had been, as you said, his early works were predominantly nuts and bolts UFOs, and at the time, most books were nuts and bolts UFOs. There was nothing, it wasn't a lot around that approached this topic this way. So he was kind of almost coming in the dark a bit, sort of, because there was no kind of way this had been done before. And I get the idea, certainly he was looking for lots and lots of stories that are mainly European, as you say, of examples of high strangers, very weird occurrences that don't fit the usual windows. And then you suppose you have to then rely on what texts are available to access at the time when he wrote this, of course. Being a European, being from France, of course, he had a lot of access to French material, to European material, to English language material, which would have covered, obviously, Europe and English-speaking countries, areas of French. But he was writing for an English-speaking audience, so it was probably going to be focused on more of those European areas. But yeah, you could have written a multi-volume edition of that by covering stories in other parts of the world. So I'm kind of in the middle, I suppose, between the two of you. I think it's a good book. It does have its flaws, and I think Susie's right. It does kind of jumble over a little bit. It kind of is a bit hit and miss on what it's talking about. It does tend to meander. Information.
There is a sequel that he wrote with Chris Aubeck as well, so they delve more into that. So, and again, when you read Vallee as a whole, it's pure genius. And one of the most fascinating things that I read are his Forbidden Science series. He covers the decades of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I think, if you go to the next one. I wait breathlessly for the next one, because he goes through his thinking process and the people he's met along the way, and some of the comments he makes about certain individuals in the UFO field are quite amusing. But he talks about the episode with his friend J.L. Hynek, with the swamp gas fiasco. And then he gets into the Morrow mystery, which we've talked about before, the two guys with the lead masks. And it's just endlessly fascinating. So I would definitely keep pursuing Jacques Vallee. And then I maybe reread Passport to Magonia, and the light may dawn, Susie, and you may have a whole different view.
Well, it sounds like that book is kind of what I'm looking for. Like, I want him to explain his thought process. I don't just want to hear a story and hear his assumptions. Like, how did you get from A to B there is kind of what I wanted a little bit more of there.
The logical progression of the argument. I get this. I mean, what about the title itself? The first, I'll be honest, the first time I read it, I read The Passport to Magnolia. I thought, that's a very strange title. What's that all about? And no, Magonia. What do you make of the title itself? I mean, it's a bit in the book, obviously, but it's an interesting choice. Steve.
John Keel used to say that that Jacques Vallee was inspired by his writings. It was like Jacques Vallee was kind of rewriting some of his stuff, because early on Vallee was very nuts and bolts, and then all of a sudden he was a little more Keelian in some respects. But that was always quite amusing.
Well, a lot of people are a little bit more Keelian after they read some Keel.
Yeah.
So
it's sort of like a taint in your blood, that there's no cure for. There's no there are no what's the word I want? Antibiotics to get rid of it.
I've got to confess, I haven't read it for quite some time. I've been doing other things, which I didn't have a chance to reread it for the show. But it does seem like a sudden kind of gear change of thinking, change of direction from these previous works to what's in Magnolia again. Magonia. Do you know why he's had this sort of change, or is it in the book? Did he explain why it's this sudden change of thinking about the source of these odd phenomena?
I don't recall him explaining that at all.
Yeah.
So maybe we do have Keel to thank for that.
You said that was the case, Stephen, that's where it comes from.
Well, I have a room full of photographs of Keel with candles lit, all the time, and so, not really. I just thought.
Do you think that was the influence that made change his thinking? Then, what was the reason for that change of thinking? Do we think? Any ideas?
with Vallee.
Yeah, yeah. Why he changed his
Well,
point of view?
I don't know. He just it just kind of it was. I think it was like so many. Well, for me too. I was a very happy ET guy, and didn't want to hear anything else about the weird stuff. But if you're exposed enough to if you're listening to the experiencer, and you're reading the history of what's happened, of what people have experienced, you either come to think a little bit differently, or you just keep ignoring it.
Yeah.
And if you keep ignoring it, you're not much of a not that I'm a scientist, but you try to be a clear thinker. You try to entertain new ideas that are presented to you that seem to have some validity. And so I think maybe that was it. I mean, he remember in early in I don't know if he mentions it in Magonia or another book, but he was he was with some scientists somewhere. They were observing phenomena on a radar or some kind of screen or whatever, and there's something that didn't fit. So the scientist just destroyed it. He didn't want to deal with it. And I wish I could remember the specific details, but that's one of the things that triggered Vallee into to look into some of this stuff.
Yeah, and to his credit, I'm not a Vallee hater, just for the record.
Oh, that's a relief. Because I didn't want to work on my transmission anyway.
Because I love when somebody can change their mind when presented with new evidence. And I do think that, he probably, as he's doing more research, talking to more experiencers, he's making connections. And, eventually he's like, oh, that reminds me of that story I heard as a kid from folklore. And he probably started putting that together from there. I mean, when I first started looking into puckwudgies, I was an atheist, didn't believe in ghosts, I didn't not believe in UFOs. I just didn't care. They weren't interesting.
Yeah.
And then, I started reading the eyewitness accounts, and that started to kind of intrigue me. And I got, more into it, and I started seeing like these similarities and things I couldn't, logically explain. And then, from there started, seeing the connections like puckwudgie sightings with orbs and Bigfoot sightings. And then, okay, where there are other places with orb sightings, maybe I could find some puckwudgies there. And then you look and, you end up in, looking into Mothman from puckwudgies eventually, right? Yeah. So it's like unraveling a sweater when you start looking into phenomena sometimes.
Well, of course. Oh, go ahead, Andy.
You can.
Of course, he was the inspiration for the French scientist in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, by Francois Truffaut.
Yes, of course.
And it's interesting because Jacques Vallee was trying to convince Spielberg not to make it E.T. He wanted it to make it more ambiguous, something because at that point in time, he didn't think it was necessarily E.T. Of course, he failed miserably, but but he tried.
More straightforward having this little green man or little of colour they were, rather than being kind of either coming from the mountain or they're coming from the spaceship.
Great soundtrack, though. Great soundtrack. Much better than Murder by Decree. Go.
A funny little coincidence, actually. This is a true story. Just very recently, I was watching a documentary. I think those unsolved mystery programs. There was a UFO event on, and I think it was. I haven't seen those for ages. I have to watch it again. So just quick to see for the TV guide on TV, see if it's actually on, and it was actually on at that moment on our Channel 4 in the UK. It's like, now that is a weird coincidence. I have to say, you're thinking about it, and it's actually on TV. But yeah, it's very cool. That is who the character is based upon.
Yeah, I was just for an aside. I was very disappointed in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It was so uneven. It could have been such a great film, but they went crazy with this building the mountain thing. They just focused way too much on that, and there are elements of it I really like, but they
Yeah,
kind
I'd agree with you. The first sort of, if you see it's a 3-act film, the first act where the UFO phenomenon first starts to happen, I do find that particularly, that's quite chilling, quite spooky. That's really good, and it does kind of descend into this this very slow pace. The third act, especially with the UFO arriving, and then all the scenes of that, which did slow it down somewhat. But overall, it's a good movie, certainly. But yes, as you say, the references, the character is Vallee, literally in the film, in the form of that French chef whose name you just have completely forgotten. But yes, I always thought that it was a logical progression to move into that kind of territory, because we have so many different kinds of phenomena that are reported around the world, different forms of strange, as we like to call it. To just have can't UFOs, spaceships on other planets, can't be ghost phenomena, it's all that kind of stuff, and there's no meeting of the two. It makes sense when you think of the vast range and variety of these things. I mean, almost no two UFO experiences are alike. You look at all the hundreds of different shapes and forms of actual spacecraft UFOs. They're all the different kinds of supposed aliens, and hundreds of them. It's like, well, can they all be so different? Why are so few reports of the same creature being seen over and over again, apart from Bigfoot, as we could say? But certainly the wide variety begs the question of, are these hundreds of different alien life forms all coming to Earth and going off again? Or is it something else that's going on? Is this high strangeness, this manifestation of extreme, ultra-terrestrial kind of area, instead that we are talking about these kind of things that do take on certain forms that adhere to different cultural ideas? And that, to me, is what Vallee is really kind of expressing. These are brilliant examples of this oddness appearing in a certain way, in a certain form that adheres to the culture that was identifying or seeing them.
Well, as I've said many times before, in the olden days, we had the coolest aliens, humanoids, whatever they were. Kelly Hopkinsville, Flatwoods, the Cisco Grove aliens, and on and on. And then, toward the end of the 70s, we had Close Encounters, and then we had that cover nobody will ever forget of Whitley Strieber's Communion. And then the grays kind of, you used to be able to find a gray once in a while, and then they sort of took over. I contend, a lot of people think that Betty and Barney Hill were taken by grays, but if you look at the illustrations, to me they don't look like grays. A gray looks like when you have a human being and you make a simplified version of them. That's what the grays look like to me compared to the Betty and Barney Hill aliens. It's almost like a toy, like a blow-up toy, maybe.
Yeah.
Compared to the actual whatever Betty and Barney Hill actually experienced.
And you have the same thing with little people sightings throughout the world. They all have similar characteristics, similar behaviors and traits, but they all look different in different areas. And, you have ones that are, more common. There's nothing like the grays with little people, but you do kind of see things being more prevalent. But it's very similar to different alien sightings. You have the Nordics and the grays and then the one-offs. It's the same thing with little people as well, which you could throw in the Fae bucket for the argument here, but it's very similar, just looked at through a different lens, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a good example is the cobalt from Eastern European underground dwellers. They look similar to that kind of small, slightly aggressive-looking creature. There's a similarity there, but I think, as you talked about before, back in the sort of Victorian times and those sort of times earlier, these things came from the ground. They came from underground. They came from hills. They came from mountains. Now they come from the sky. But it's almost like they've come from somewhere because they appear in front of us. But are they bright light spaceships that we see today, or have they come from underground dwellings that we would have seen in the past? I mean, I've read a lot of folklore material, which excuse me, I've written about, and a lot of these descriptions are talking about hillsides and forests, and those are the places these things emerge from. So the fact they kind of appear from different places, modern times, to how they used to appear, I think is just, again, it's a cultural thing. It's a change, and it is, say, highlighting those the real oddities. It's almost like Passport Magonia is almost like deconstruction, the philosophical approach, where you take apart what is known and find the bits that don't fit, the anomalies to the ideas. And when you're dealing with predominantly nuts and bolts spaceships, ideas of those times, he's finding those stories that just don't fit those theories at all. It's philosophically deconstructing the whole notion of UFOs and uncovering this whole massive strangeness that is historic, but also is of its time as well. So that's another aspect I find fascinating, this whole idea of just looking between the lines to see what else is going, what's being ignored almost. I mean, the whole idea of nuts and bolts UFOs sounds crazy to the average public anyway. So for us to say, well, actually, that's probably not, it's even weird stuff going on, is a bit too much, perhaps. So I find that being able to put forward those ideas, in a sense, it's quite brave, because he was stepping outside the norm, which I would say, of the UFO world. Sorry, Steve.
That's okay. John Keel, actually, I think it may have been APRO, the Area Phenomena Research Organization, the Lorenzens, that started talking about, humanoid encounters. I know that Donald Kehoe didn't want to talk about it. They were happy to talk about the flying saucers chasing aircraft all day. Didn't want to hear about the guys, inside. And then John Keel, around that time, for True Magazine, wrote an article called "Never Mind the Saucer. Did you see the guys who were driving?" And the publisher of True brought him in one time to his office, and he showed him these 6 giant postal bags filled with letters of people that had claimed some kind of an encounter. So, man, it really triggered something. And I think that's around the time that Keel was thinking about window areas. What are these? They seem to pop in and pop out, including cryptids. They come in, scare the crap out of people, maybe leave some footprints, hair samples, and then they're gone. So there is something, whether we follow Keel's transmogrification of energy, or whatever, it seems like perhaps, and with what Susie was saying, perhaps these things simply manifest differently. And I can't help but think of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle in The Coming of the Fairies, saying that the appearance of the fairies is determined largely by the person viewing them. And he said that a long time ago, and I think he was right.
I agree. I mean, I often cite the example of Martian Chronicles, the scene with the first Church of Mars, because I remember as a kid, it had quite an influence on me, obviously, but that's the same idea. The guy was, the vicar was seeing Christ at the back of the church, and the marshal was saying, "Stop doing this to me, it hurts. I'm appearing how you want me to appear. That's not my appearance, but I'm getting it from you. And you're enforcing that upon me, and I don't want to appear like this." And, that's one of the things I think that when you approach these kind of experiences, they're outside your norm. If you've got an idea of what you think UFO is supposed to be like, then you might see a UFO as it's supposed to appear to be. But if you don't have any preconceptions of what this stuff is, then it just looks damn weird. We talked before about the idea of the light anomaly as being the first kind of experience that people have, is just this strange light, then becomes something else as being a common initial experience of seeing things.
Steve, did Vallee in any of his other books get into any of his theories behind what this phenomena was, where it was coming from? Keel kind of did a lot of work in trying to talk about radio signals and the light spectrum and sound spectrum and trying to explain it. Did Vallee ever get into that?
Well, there is if I can just find it here really quickly, a brief little passage toward the end of the book. He says, I won't read the whole thing, but he says, there exists a natural phenomenon whose manifestations border on both the physical and the mental. There is a medium in which human dreams can be implemented, and this is the mechanism by which UFO events are generated, needing no superior intelligence to trigger them. It goes on further. So I don't know if that's his full. I mean, that book was written back in the '60s, so I don't know if he's still if that is the full scope. But it sounds a lot like Carl Jung. It sounds a lot like Keel's co-creation with whatever this energy or intelligence is, and so it may be that, and then we've got Albert Rosales and his incredible database. You go through those 15 books from 01 AD to 2015, and my God, we talk about a variety of entities, humanoids or beings or whatever they are. So it suggests that unless this is an incredible grand central station for all kinds of entities that just flow through here for some reason, I don't know why they'd want to flow through here. Maybe it's cheaper to go through the planet Earth than some other places. I don't know.
Yeah.
Save a few pounds, save a few bucks.
Yeah.
But, so I that's the only thing that comes to mind at the moment, is that he seemed to think there was something to do with, I guess, human consciousness. But as even Keel backtracked a little bit later on. He with the ET idea, he said, "Look, my ultra terrestrial idea, or whatever, is just, he thinks that there's more than one answer to these things, and I guess it seems like there has to be more than one answer to these things. That one answer doesn't fit all. That for sure."
Yeah, as we were talking, I'm kind of like realizing maybe that's what left something to be desired for me with this book. What I liked about Keel is, like, no one's going to solve this, right? It's just kind of like the nature of the phenomena is it doesn't want to be solved, it seems like. But Keel really tried. He gave you a lot to think about. And even like when you put that book down, you keep thinking, right?
Right.
And Passport to Magonia didn't do the same thing for me. It was just kind of like a compilation of cool stories. And that was the end. Like, once I finished it, I was done.
Oh, I'm so depressed. Oh. I'll get over it.
The big part of that is that he was one of the first of that kind of thing to find that there's a higher strength. I mean, you say he was quoting from magazines, because those are the sort of places you'd find those sort of stories. And there was nobody who sat down and really kind of compiled them, I suppose, is what you put. And that's really what Magonia does, is a compilation of all these really odd events that just don't fit even the more normal paranormal understanding, if you know what I mean. It was going beyond that as well. But as I say, it was a while since I last read it. I've not had a chance because we're working on other things. But it was one of those books that did strike me as being really quite impressive when I first acquired it. Well, Susie, she disappeared.
I don't know. She vanished mysteriously. Maybe she's ashamed of all the horrible things she said about Passport to Magonia.
Oh dear, it's you, so you cut her off.
But the one thing that I really like, well, it's a good point, Andy. This is an early book back in the 1960s, and even later on, he I think when he in an introduction to the follow-up, he or when in some interviews or whatever, he said that some mistakes were made in the first one that he would have liked to have corrected. I don't know which ones, but it was like, you do the sequel and you can straighten some things out. The one of the things I just absolutely love about Magonia is his I would have never known about Walter Evans Wentz and the fairy faith in Celtic countries if it hadn't been for Jacques Vallee. And, that the idea that this theosophist, this Irishman, went through Ireland in the early 1900s and talked to people about their experiences, like we do, talking about people about their Bigfoot sighting or UFO sighting. And this wasn't just, Uncle Ebenezer from 100 years ago talking about the fairies. These were people that had what they believe were real experiences in real time. And so that's really, and so I do have the book, and I've read parts of it, But of course, the fairy faith in Celtic countries is almost as big as OASP. Maybe not quite that big. No book is as big as OASP, but
but it's half drawing, so don't give it too much credit.
That's fair enough.
The thing I love about OASP is the charts, man. They've got the phenomenal charts. They may not mean anything. It could be the ravings of a madman or a genius. I don't know. But any book that has charts in it like that is cool in my book.
Well, one section that really struck, the one that I have read again fairly recently, was when Vallee's talking about the Secret Commonwealth, Kirk's book, because I'm actually working on a new edition of that particular book. It's got, as well as obviously the original book itself, I've came across an analysis of the text written in about the 1920s. So it's out of copyright, which is very useful.
Annotated?
It will be partly, yes, because what I've found is this analysis this guy has done of the text, which was published in the 1930s, I think it was, or 20s, and it's the only time it's ever been published. It's not been done again. I managed to find an early copy of it, so it's out of copyright.
Oh, that would be great.
So I'm actually working for another friend of mine who runs Troy Books. I'm working on this for them because they're doing a lot of a series of these older folklore books. So that hopefully be out next year. So that's so of course I reread the section where Vallee talks about this Commonwealth material, and Kirk's view is very developed, should we say, for someone writing in the 1600s. It's very clearly developed, this idea that we're talking about an underground Commonwealth. There's a whole host of these beings that are living there. They're all part of this, both literally underground as well as metaphorically hidden away underground. That he's obviously done a lot of research himself at the time. So that's something I've been working on. As I say, it should be out hopefully, probably next year. We'll get it worked on. But as I say, it's a combination of the original text plus this very good analysis, which, as I say, not seen the light of day since the 1920s. So actually becoming that soon. But that was an area again. It's this idea of this otherness that was always there. It's always been with us. Perhaps more so today, we tend to ignore even more because our world's become very materialistic based, very sort of the solid world is everything that's real. And as we know, people even begin to explore the stranger stuff tend to get laughed at, even though we know that the American government, for example, is listing UAEs is interested in this stuff. They actually are researching that and have been for a number of years, but still the average person in the street would not, but at the same time tell stories of their own strange experiences, even though they might say, I don't particularly believe in this stuff, I had this happen to me, I had that happen to me. And often when you talk to these people who don't believe, who mock it, you draw down with them, they're more afraid than anything else. They don't want the idea of there being strange things going around them all the time they don't notice. They'd rather not know about it, rather pretend none of it's real. Which again I find is a psychologically speaking a fascinating position to take. It's like, well, it's real. Deal with it. No, I don't want to. No, I don't want to know. No, I find that
it is still here with us, even though some modern day UFO experiences are very are almost carbon copies of the with a few embellishments of some of the old encounters. Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who was a great researcher we lost a few years ago, she was in I don't know if she was in Ireland or England, but she was sitting down cross-legged and she looked across and there was this little man with sitting cross-legged with the hat and the beard and everything. And they kind of looked at each other for a while and eventually he faded away. Paul Devereaux, who writes all the books on Earth, he talked about an experience he had. He was there with his wife and he saw this little being. And it was kind of hard to see him at first because it's almost like he was camouflaged with a sort of like looked a little bit like bark, like part of a tree or whatever. I mean, he kind of blended in, and then again he just kind of faded away. So people are still having the classic fairy leprechaun experienches today. Absolutely. And I don't know what the hell I'd do if that happened to me. I might be heading for the next county line. I don't know.
We're hoping for it to happen, you see. That's the whole idea. We want you to have these experiences. Just a very quick, brief plug for a second there. Now, the Paranormal UK network, the YouTube channel I run, which has got our shows on, I recently re-uploaded our this is a long time ago, KTPS interview with Rosemary Ellen Guiley. So that's actually on there as a recent new addition. So if you want to pop along, you can listen to her talking about. Normally the jinn, I think, became a real kind of focus for her toward the end, as it were, has been these the Middle Eastern Islamic, well, they became Islamic, they predate Islam, but the jinn spirits, where the genie idea comes from. But again, that's the same kind of creature, this kind of living amongst us, particularly the jinn, the idea of these sort of the fire beings living within fire that are around, shall we say, they're present all the time, and just you don't notice them being there, and she'd become quite interested in those at sort of the end of her life, as it were. So the interview there is on the Paranormal UK radio, no, Paranormal UK network, the YouTube channel it's called. It's not radio, it's more than just that. If you want to have a listen to that, she's on there.
So were there any of the stories that were either particularly compelling towards, or were there any that you were like, this is hogwash, just throw the whole thing away? Anything that sticks out to you either way?
Well, for me, it would be the Secret Commonwealth, because it's quite, in the 60s and 50s, it's a pretty obscure book. To have actually sort of tracked it down, I mean, it was published in the 16th, it was a long time ago. There was an 1800s edition, but it wasn't that well known. It's quite a short little book. So the fact that you even found that and then trawled through it, I was quite impressed by that, I have to say. What about you, Steve?
So, and I know I keep comparing him to Keel, but there was one story in there where, you know, Keel in Mothman Prophecies talks about only men get symptoms of STDs after UFO sightings. And I said, that is a load of horse crap when I read that. I had the same experience reading this. There was one story where a married man was gone, I think it was 6 days, and he just disappeared. And then he came home and said, oh no, I was out playing my flute. I was only gone half an hour. There were these weird little men that were there, but I swear I was only gone half an hour. And I think that the evidence he used to make it compelling was that the man was clean shaven after 6 days. I'm like, yeah, he shaved at his mistress's house before he came home. Like, big deal.
Yeah, good cover story. Absolutely abducted by aliens.
Well, I confess I've never had to use that excuse for
Just a thought actually just popped in my head about pug watches. You're the expert in that particular. Are they male and female, or you can't tell?
So, I have never heard of any that seem to not be male for Pukwudgie specifically, but I have heard of little people sightings. Actually, a woman I just spoke to a few weeks ago said she had seen about a dozen of them together, and there were definitely some female and some male. But Pukwudgies I've only ever heard of as appearing to be male.
It does seem to be the majority of UFO figures being sighted are either asexual or men. They don't tend to be a lot of female aliens, which is interesting.
It's hard to imagine a feminine Pukwudgie. I don't know. I just
Yeah, and the thing about Pukwudgies is they have the big pot belly that everyone says, like, you can't tell if they have pants on or not because the pot belly hangs down too low.
Well,
so they could be asexual.
Pot bellies, they're male. That's the way it is.
Or female and pregnant. It's a possibility. Maybe.
But I think my favorite story he talks about is Anne Jeffries, which I think is perfect for both of you because it has some parallels with the Shaver mystery. And it's also, I have a theory to explain it partially with psychology.
Okay.
But just, a quick reminder, Anne Jeffries, it would have been around 1640 because she got thrown in prison around the time of the English Civil War. So she had basically become an indentured servant around the age of 12. And she actually, by her account, she sought out the Fae and she would go into the woods. And I don't think he gets into this much detail in Passport, but there's a lot of information about it out there. She there's different accounts of how big they were, but in a lot of the time she describes them as like sitting in her hand.
Right.
So very small, and multiple of them, but there was one main one that she had a more of a connection with, but she had an intimate physical relationship with these beings, and they would give her this magical bread, and eventually she got healing powers. But through this, she actually became more involved and passionate about the church at the time.
Right.
And I believe she was Catholic, but because of the time period, there was a lot of back and forth between Protestants and Catholics, and she got herself in trouble and thrown in prison at one point. And instead of having her sit in prison, they actually took her to stay with, I believe, the mayor, or the authority figure of the town at that point, and without food. They weren't allowing her to eat for whatever reason. But she did fine because these little people were bringing her the bread. And at one point, she gave someone the bread. I believe it was her brother, who said it was the best bread he'd ever have. I don't know how good bread was around 1640, but it could have been great. I don't know.
It was probably Sarah Lee, but go ahead.
But what it feels like to me is that she experienced some kind of abuse, and this was kind of a psychological getaway for her.
Yeah.
But the trauma from whatever abuse she was going through maybe opened her up to be able to tap into something, because she was very much known to be a healer, and pretty successfully, because this was 1640. She didn't get locked up for witchcraft and executed or anything, right? She was still in the good graces of the church, even though she spoke openly about this. And she even talks about, well, everyone in town loved me. It just seems weird, like the time period. And then she's getting the special treatment, staying with the mayor instead of in prison. I think that might have partially been because she was kind of inciting religious fights in the prison. And she was a woman too, so having a woman in prison can be problematic. But I think there was a lot going on in her real life.
Weren't some of her experiences in a trance state, where she didn't leave her bed, but she had all these imaginary experiences with the fairies?
Yeah. And if it wasn't for that very physical, tangible bread, you could write it off as just, delusions or dreams or what have you. But the bread and the healing, there's something else going on there, I think.
There's another incident that Vallee talks about, Knock, Ireland, where they see it's raining and they see this light up above, and the three figures, I think, were the Virgin Mary, John the Baptist, and can't remember what the third one was. But people were seeing these images there, and they would go up, and one woman went to put her arms around Mary, and it just went right through. And the rain wasn't touching the area. It was, but the thing is, if this was seen in a different context, I mean, if there were aliens, in the little silver suits, it would have been, it could have been the same type of phenomena, only viewed differently. But in this way, it was viewed in a very religious context, and I always thought that was a fascinating experience.
It draws me kind of idea that it's maybe that they present themselves that form or that's simply what you see it as. It's the kind of thing your brain seeing something it doesn't understand, but starts to form into something that makes sense. So you're seeing a religious figure, even though what is actually there, it does not know that at all, because the brain can't really comprehend it. I mean, I always talk about this parallel story. The American natives, and if the Westerners first arrived, they seemed, from the American native stories, they appeared on the shore from nowhere. Because the ships are out there, but they had seen nothing even remotely like that. The brain couldn't even see it. It was like almost deleted out. So if you've got this kind of amorphous thing that you can't make sense of, your brain latches into what makes sense for you. I mean, it's a human psychological phenomenon. We all do it all the time. You take anything that's got two dots on a line and you see a face, even though it's just two dots on a line. Our brains are geared to pattern recognition. So, of course, they see, if they're religiously minded, they see this thing, they start seeing it as a religious figure, be it the Virgin Mary or Jesus or whoever, because that's how the brain's geared to see it. It's like people seeing visions of Shiva or Vishnu or Krishna in Indian culture, because, again, they're geared to seeing those kinds of things. That's how their minds are working. So you could say that these things, as I often say, take on those forms, or they actually don't. They stay amorphous blobs, but our brains see them as that, which goes back to what you said before, Steve, about the Jungian concept, that it's archetypal, that those forms are in our subconscious, and the things don't even form into that imagery, but that we still see them being like that, because that's how our brains are geared to work.
You think because the context of it was a Catholic belief system,
Yeah,
but again, you wonder what generated this in the first place.
yes.
Even I mentioned David Wales many times, the David Enigma by Pew and Holiday. They had all this bizarre UFO stuff going on, but initially, when they were living in a caravan, a trailer by the sea, they were having some mild poltergeist phenomena. They would look out the window, through the window only, at 10 o'clock p.m. every night. They would see the Virgin Mary would form, all dressed in white with a rosary, and eventually it would morph into the image of Jesus and then fade away. Several hundred people saw this.
Yeah.
And people that aren't from a Catholic tradition would say, "Oh, it's got to be something else because it's the Virgin Mary with the rosary and so forth." Others from the Catholic tradition would say, "Well, yeah, this is an actual manifestation of the Virgin Mary." But again, you wonder what triggers these things. Is it Carl Jung's collective unconscious bubbling up every once in a while and just kind of leaking out and manifesting somehow?
In a sense, I'd say yes. Well, yes and no, in the sense that if the thing is actually present to us as a phenomenon before us, and then our brains are giving it a form, but it's coming from that collective identity, the idea. Remember you saying before now, the Catholics are seeing the Virgin Mary out of the window. If you had a bunch of Hindus sitting out there, they wouldn't see the Virgin Mary, they'd see like the name of the woman now. Lakshmi is the female kind of version, would be from Hindu mythology, with that kind of imagery, but what they would see. So they would get a different image, but what's actually out there is neither the Virgin Mary nor Lakshmi. It's amorphous thing that is taken an identity because it's what we're projecting onto it, but it doesn't even form that identity. It's just what's in our heads. So yeah, I kind of agree.
I think brother and sister sheep herders in the 1800s, I'm not sure, in France, they saw in kind of a ravine this sort of like a UFO, sort of like an egg-shaped object or some kind of a round glowing object. And when the door opened or whatever, they saw the Virgin Mary was in there, all dressed in robes and so forth. And I thought, wow, Virgin Mary showing up in a spaceship? That's pretty darn cool.
I would say you fit that kind of, again, that phenomenon that what you see is what you're not even consciously expecting to see, but it's adhering to what your belief system is.
But sometimes, even people like me, who can be dumber than dirt when it comes to this stuff, will all of a sudden, people that are hard-nosed skeptics will all of a sudden see some kind of a craft land in front of them, or have some kind of bizarre experience. And that's always interesting, that someone that is just It's not on their radar. They don't believe it, and then all of a sudden, bam! It's right in front of them.
That's why the Bill Russo Pukwudgie sighting is one of my favorites, because when I talked to him, I asked him, have you had any other experiences, or anyone else? He's like, I'm not into this stuff at all. I just saw a weird thing once.
Yeah,
that was that, and he really he didn't know anything about Pukwudgies when he saw them, which made it more interesting to me. It was, someone else that posited, oh, I think that's what you saw. And he just went with that because he didn't know anything else. So, but it is weird. And the story, I believe it was in Germany, of the army that disappeared into a cloud that Vallee talked about.
Right.
It's the same time period. They're from the same place. Maybe they all have the same beliefs, but what kind of beliefs make you disappear into a cloud?
Yeah, none whatsoever. You're dimensional gateways opened up.
That's all. Light is missing 411.
Yeah. Oh, yes. There's a parallel to that. They do simply literally disappear, and occasionally turn them in very strange places, miles away from where they've disappeared from. But I think, just going back to something Steve was saying before, I think with our modern mindset, even if you don't believe in UFOs at all or anything, you have been exposed to the idea. You've kind of not been. So you've been on TV, you've been in a newspaper or whatever. The idea is in the psyche, the effective psyche. But if you look at the older sort of Victorian and pre-Victorian folkloric stories we were talking about before, they never come from the sky. They never come from the spaceships. They never came from these lights, because there was no conception of that. The idea of aliens and other planets, there was no idea of that. So these things were never described like that. They were described as coming from the ground, they're coming from mountains, from the woods. So, there is this, even if you're a skeptic, non-believer, you do have in your mind an idea of things like UFOs, because it's in the general psyche, the modern psyche now. And there's a kind of parallel with something I've done a lot of research into as well, which is sleep paralysis and hypnagogic dreaming phenomena, where people have these experiences of things being in the room with them and they can't move. I won't go on it a lot because I talk this so many times you'll get bored with talking about it, but you get a certain image comes into mind of what's in the room with you, and it's definitely based on your belief systems. My research showed people who are interested in the paranormal, ghosts, even just horror films, would have what called the old hag, this witch figure in the room sitting on their chest. You're into UFOs or just Star Trek or just space generally. You typically see aliens and have abduction experiences instead. Now, neither of these were real experiences, I believe. They were psychological experiences, because those who had no interest at all in either would see things like family members. It was definitely geared to what you believed. And if you have a strange aerial light phenomena, you're going to think UFO, because it's what we believe in these days. It's what's in the psyche, if you like, in the general populace. Whereas if it was in the Victorian times, you wouldn't think that for a moment. When some of the stuff I've come across directly, these strange encounters, they sometimes appear from nowhere, much like the American Exodus in the ships. They're literally popping out of nowhere, and so these figures are in front of them. And talking about greys, actually, that's always stuck in my mind with these two young men that were seen that were grey-skinned children who seemed to magic a cow off a cliff and back up again, which is pretty bizarre. So there is that kind of, if you don't have an idea of where you think these things are coming from, it's not in your psyche at all. They just appear from nowhere. But if you have been even slightly exposed to anything like Star Trek, Star Wars, you still have a science fiction idea that you see a UFO.
Steve, you have to stop believing that you don't experience things, because maybe if you just tell yourself you do, that's when you're going to see a UFO.
Susie, it could be because I just might be a little slow. When I was in grade school, early in grade school, they thought I was a little slow, and they were probably right. But I got faster later on. But one of the things that really fascinated me was the mushrooms sprouting up around in flying saucer landing areas. He talks about, I think it's Necochea in 310 miles south of Buenos Aires. A civilian pilot was passing overhead. He sees this strange pattern on the ground, and so he alerts the military, and they go and they check it out, and it's a place where an alleged flying saucer had landed, and there is a circle of 9 yards in diameter of 8 white giant mushrooms growing there. And I thought, holy cow. And then they mentioned there was supposedly some other places. And I went to my archives here. This is the old Skylook magazine, which became the MUFON Journal. And there was another incident. Let's see. It was the 2 technicians from the National Highway Department, 2 inspectors. They're, Yakel to Zanta was their jurisdiction. And some children, there was a school nearby, and some children said if they had been working on the other side of the hill there. And they thought, what are they talking about? And it turned out there was supposed to be some strange lights or whatever had come down. But so they go over there, and they find that there's there are actually tripod marks and burn marks suggesting perhaps some kind of landing, perhaps some kind of hoax, who knows. But then they found around the tripod marks were these mushrooms growing, and there were about 7 of them altogether, and they were about the heads of them were about 8 inches in diameter, and they're growing in this it's a very kind of a barren, rocky area. I mean, there's no reason a mushroom should be growing there. And so I thought, wow, is that weird? I mean, we always associate the little people with fairy rings, and of course, fairy rings are oftentimes because of it's just a natural phenomena, because the way I can't explain it because I'm not really good at explaining natural phenomena, but it's not supernatural.
No, yeah.
I just thought there've been a few cases where, and supposedly in one of these cases, they even could, if they came back after a while, they could still see these things growing a little bit. So what the heck, mushroom growing near a landing site, and try and figure that one out.
Absolutely.
So those are two different sources.
If mushrooms are related to ultra-terrestrials at all, or they can be controlled by ultra-terrestrials, we are screwed, because they're like every inch of the ground almost here is a mycorrhizal network, because for every mushroom you see, there is like an underground megacity of fungus, basically.
Oh, really? Okay.
Mycelium. So like they're everywhere. So if we ever go too far and really tick off the ultra terrestrials and they can control the mushrooms, we're goners.
As much as I go to Village Pizza here in town, which used to be a Chinese restaurant where a famous Mothman sighting occurred, I never order a Mothman pizza because its wings are made out of mushrooms.
Oh, cool.
Stay way the hell away from that.
Certain kinds of mushrooms should definitely stay well away from them, that's for sure. They're very nasty. I think some are very delirious effect, shall we say.
You might see little men if you ate those. Either
Yes.
way.
Oh, yes, I think so, yes.
Oh, I can't. I just cannot do it. Certain things I cannot consume.
I don't mind the odd well-made mushroom, but yes, I can see the risks.
All right. So I have to say, I do feel a little bit less grouchy about the book after talking to you guys, which I knew I would.
Good. If we were to score it out of 10, what would you say?
4.5.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, we'll
Seems
see.
We'll do that. To quote another show, Steve Toupee nearly fell off then.
I'm just not going to sleep well tonight. I don't know.
I think we just got video evidence for Mac that your hair is real, though.
Oh, good.
video evidence from Mac.
Yeah, because he's always saying you have a hairpiece, but
Oh.
the way you just put your head down after I
Yeah.
said 4.5 proves, because it would have flown off if you had a
Oh,
two-head.
that's true. The horrible truth is I desperately need a haircut, but I don't know when I'm going to have time to do it. So,
Blimey. Well, I wish I had that problem, but there we go. I'd give it probably a more generous sort of 7 to 7.5. Only because, again, it was one of the earliest ones I read of that kind of. I mean, it always sounds a bit pompous, I know, but that was my thinking already when I started discovering people like Vallee and Keel. It was like, blimey, I'm not the only one that thinks like this, and I didn't know you guys at that point, obviously.
See, we're back to my Star Wars comparison. So, like, if Star Wars is one of the first sci-fi movies that you watch, real impressive probably. It was not the first for me, and neither was this book. So, I'm going to blame Keel for, ruining it for me.
Yeah, I mean, I would compare it to things like The Exorcist. I know those are sort of when it first came out at the time, were like horrified by it, but now it's pretty tame compared to a lot of modern films. But yeah, it's your perspective. As I say, if it is your first real experience of that kind of stuff, like it was for me, then it is a good solid 7. I do get what you say, and I do agree that it does seem to be jump all over the place. There's lots of not really following through with stuff, lots of good examples, but the examples I found fascinating. I really was taken by that.
Yep.
What about you, Steve? What do you give it out of 10?
Susie, the Force will be with you always. Now, have you seen The Empire Strikes Back?
That was a superior film.
That's the best of the original 3. Ironically, the sequel, which has a cliffhanger at the end, is the best. It is a superbly done film. You should check out The Empire Strikes Back. Now,
I'm just going to make you guys more mad at me. The only bit of anything Star Wars related that I've enjoyed was The Mandalorian.
I never saw it.
I just like the Baby Yoda. That was it.
I must admit, also, I am more of a Star Trek than Star Wars.
Yeah, I'm saying here,
well.
Star Trek. Now, Andy, which Star Trek? Which version? The original, the follow-ups, the.
Actually, to be perfectly honest, my favourite, and I get insulted with this, is actually Voyager. I really enjoyed Voyager. The elements of the original Star Trek being out there on their own, with much more sort of up-to-date technology of the time, in terms of the special effects. But yeah, I particularly enjoyed the Voyager. I've had the next generation and the movies. I'm not a mad big fan of the original because, again, it's of its time. It hasn't aged particularly well in some episodes, but generally speaking,
Andy, you and Susie are
it's an age thing, maybe.
The original series is the best. They could take the rest of them. I know that they've done a nice job on them. They could bury them in a shallow grave, for all I care, and that would be fine.
I think each one is of its time, of its audience, shall we say. I mean, there's a particular version called Voyager Discovery, which I think is dreadful. It's kind of it get off topic a bit, but one of the things I always notice with Star Wars is about want and need, about failings. Star Trek is a little bit about success and abundance, and things are good. Voyager tries to be Star Wars. It tries to be sort of lots of illicit things going on in the background, things are what they seem, and that's not what Star Trek's about. Star Trek's about unity, about success, about caring for each other. And Discovery doesn't fit that into kind of framework, and I think that's a mistake. Completely off topic, I know, but I just want to get that in there.
Well, let me give you the best line of the entire Star Wars series. Of course, it's the original series. Here is the best line. Are you ready? I am endeavoring, man, to construct a mnemonic memory circuit using stone knives and bear skins. Spock said that to Edith Keeler in Sydney on the Edge of Forever.
One of the best episodes, I have to say.
Yes, absolutely.
Someone, Alan Dean Foster wrote that. I know it was who wrote that? It was
Harlan Ellison. And,
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, right, yes, yeah.
And there was a huge pissing match where Ellison they had to actually change it because it was getting too long and too expensive. And the Dorothy Fontana, this has nothing to do with Passport to Magonia, but Dorothy Fontana, who became kind of a story editor, she was given the task to rewrite some of it, and she made them swear to not tell Harlan Ellison that she did the rewriting, because I actually met him once.
Oh,
And I didn't say much anything to him. I was completely intimidated. I knew his reputation, so boy, he was.
So I've got one more thing to make you mad with, Steve.
Oh gosh, here we go.
The first time I saw an episode of the original, I said, "Why is the guy from In Search Of on this show?"
Yeah.
Guy from In Search Of. Oh, no! Oh no! Oh no! And why are his ears pointed? Do you remember the episode? Just out of curiosity.
If I saw it again, like I could recognize the planet they were on, probably.
They all look the same.
Unless they all look the same, yeah. But I was young. I must have been like 7, 8 years old, something like that.
Yeah.
Well, go to the first season toward the end. A City on the Edge of Forever. Joan Collins. It's just it's a very, very well crafted episode.
With Joan Collins, of course, as well.
Yeah.
Come on, Stephen. You're not giving us your score out of 10 yet for Passport.
I'm sorry?
What's your score out of 10 for Passport to Magonia?
Oh, the 10. It was 10 because I had my awakening happened with Trojan Horse, and then shortly after I read this, and I thought, oh my God, that this is making those connections between some elements of, and of course it was mostly Celtic folklore, but and modern UFO experiences, and it was just it was sort of like I don't know, I could get a little biblical here. Paul on the road to enlightenment,
Right.
like why are you persecuting me, believing in extraterrestrials all the time, you dummy? So I had the
Fair enough.
I don't know what that brings our average to, but I think my score could come up if maybe I read another Vallee book.
Oh, you listen. You have Susie. You have to read Dimensions. Dimensions, Confrontations, and Revelations. You've got to read those 3 books. But also with your view of the trickster and all the sneaky stuff going on, you have to read Messengers of Deception. Also, that's a must read. And and listen, they're expensive, but if you can ever get out enough shekels to afford the Forbidden Science series, I don't know if I'd start with the 60s. I would start with the 70s. 70s is probably more interesting, and then the 80s and then that's all fascinating. And
Well, to answer the question, it would give us an average of 7 out of 10 between the 3 of us. So
I think that's fair.
not too bad.
Good thing I'm here to get the average up. Thank God I didn't take the night off. That's all I can say.
Definitely.
Well, I will cease on bringing us down, and we'll call it a night now that you guys have, raised my hopes for Vallee a little bit.
A little bit. Oh, come on.
I hope it's enough for our audience to track it out down themselves if they've not read it before, that we'll go out and try and pick up a copy of Passport. It is definitely worth a read. Even if you are listening to this, you're an absolute diehard nuts and bolts UFO guy, still read it. It might change your mind.
Great stories, if nothing else. Very interesting stories.
The thing is that people, I actually talked to people at the Michigan MUFON Symposium in 1976 when I was a pariah for that, talking about Keel. There were people, when I would talk to them about the Vallee and the folklore and so forth, they said, well, they probably were just aliens, but they viewed them in a different context. They couldn't see clearly. What do you mean? They couldn't see their little red cap and green tunic? Come on, buddy.
Oh, who are you to say who is the one that's seeing it clearly?
Mm,
Who's the one
exactly.
to-
I think that,
Oh, right.
Because that's your lens.
yeah,
You don't know that
exactly.
your lens is correct.
True of all of us, though. That's the saying that would be true of all of us. I see it based on our beliefs and our own ideas. We might have a shared unconscious notion of what these things are. Therefore, we see something similar. But yeah, I don't think they have a set identity. I mean, you read reports of people, groups of people have had UFO experiences, and they do often describe something slightly different because that's how our minds work.
Yep.
And the caption for tonight under tonight's show should be, "What's the guy doing on Star Trek that should have been on what was it? In Search of, right? That's
Yeah, what was he
Guy from
doing?
In Search of doing on this show. I was little.
Fair enough.
okay. You're still little, right? In a way.
Occasionally taller.
I've been the same height since 5th grade.
Really?
Yep. I was the tall kid, and then
Well,
that happened.
I think I'm shrinking, so before long I'll probably be about your height.
Well, I'm afraid you're probably right. You probably are shrinking. I must be the very last time I got measured at the hospital for different reasons. According to the measurement, I dropped below 6 foot. I've been 6 foot since I was 14, and now I was same as 5'11" and a half. I thought, well, that's like okay. 5'11" and a half sounds much shorter than 6 foot was half an inch. But I definitely thought, oh, I am aging. Obviously, I am shrinking.
That'd be a great movie, Honey, I Shrunk Andy Mercer.
Yeah. The years shrunk, but the years of toil and pressure have shrunk.
All right. Before Andy shrinks so much he disappears, let's say goodnight to everyone.
Yeah.
And thanks everyone for watching. And we will see you next time.
Indeed. See you
Good
all.
night, all.